Hello everyone, thank you for joining us today for the How to Create Intense Flavors with Vapor live webinar. I am Tanina, I am a product specialist at Büchi here in Switzerland, and I would like to let Simone introduce himself as well.
Thank you very much, Tanina. Hi everyone, and welcome to this webinar. I'm Simone Onorati from the Jerry Thomas project in Rome, and we will actually show you how to apply technological development to classic cocktails and how to actually use the Vapor applications in your bar.
Great, thank you, Simone. So from now on, we're going to stop sharing our camera so that it's easier for you as well. Just a few things before we start. You have the control panel on the upper right corner of your screen. You can click on the arrow in order to close it or to open it. And you also have a question section, a chat section in the panel. Don't hesitate to write your questions there. We will try to answer as much questions as we can during this Q&A at the very end. In this webinar, I will show you what's the Vapor and what's the basic use of the Vapor, and then Simone will show you how you can actually use it in your bar or in your kitchen. But first, I would like to tell you a bit more about the company. So we are Büchi Labortechnik. Here on the slide, you can see our headquarters here in Switzerland. For your information, Mr. Walter Büchi actually commercialized the very first Vapor in 1957. So we're a bit kind of the creators of the Vapor. What's a Vapor actually? Let's start with the basic of that so that you guys know what we're talking about. So the Vapor is basically this instrument that you see on the slide right now. How does it work? So you will have your sample in your flask. Then we will heat your sample. The whole system will be under vacuum. And because of the fact that you are under vacuum, the boiling point of the solvent of your product will be lower than what it would be at normal air pressure. And so basically, due to that, we don't have to heat as much as you would have to do it normally. And that's how the flavors keep actually intact. So again, I heat there, then I have vapor coming out of my product, right? Then in this condenser, you will have either water or a recirculating chiller. I will teach you a bit more later on how this works. So this will remove the energy, and then you will have your condensate in this flask that you have on the left side. So in order to make this whole Vapor work, obviously I told you that you are under vacuum. So in order to make it work, you will need a vacuum pump. So we at Büchi actually offer the whole system. So here you have the Vapor, you have the vacuum pump in order to have vacuum once again. Then you have the chiller here. And what's the chiller? So instead of putting water in your condenser, you can decide to go for a chiller. In the chiller, you will have ethylene glycol. And so you will be basically circulating ethylene glycol in the condenser, which is really good, first of all, in terms of water consumption, obviously, because you won't use water anymore, and also in terms of temperature, because you will always have the same temperature. And then you have the interface here in the middle, where you will be able to see all the parameters of your rotary evaporator. But for that, I will just let me change quickly into the video so that you can see how you can use your Vapor. So hello everyone, I am Tanina and I would like to welcome you today in our headquarters here in Flawville, Switzerland. Please follow us into our labs. So as you can see here, you can see all our systems, but today please follow me because we're going to focus on the rotary evaporator. So that's a full rotary evaporator system. So you can see here the Vapor, you can see the vacuum pump next to it, and the chiller just down there. And also you can see the interface here that is going to be connected to all the systems of the rotary evaporator. So we'll ask you to come a bit closer here. As you can see, I have my flask here in which I have my sample. So the sample is tea, peppermint tea, so it's water and the tea. And as you can notice here, we have what we call a beaker flask. So what's a beaker flask? The beaker flask actually has a much bigger opening, as you can see here, compared to a normal evaporating flask. As you can see, it's much smaller here. So what's the benefit of the beaker flask, especially in the mixology and food applications? You will have your sample here, so your food like your, I don't know, oranges or whatever, and if you want to get back your sample, then you can access to it much easier than in a normal flask. So how does it work? Quite easily, you just close the system, and that's tight. I will put my flask now onto the reservoir. Make sure that here it's quite tight. Don't go all the way, but make sure it's a bit tight. So now we're going to come a bit closer to the interface so that you can see how this works. So you can see all the parameters on the interface. So as you can see, you have the vacuum, the rotation, the heating bath, the chiller, and if you go down there, you also have the vapor and the lift. What will be interesting for you to know first is to know the heating bath temperature and the chiller's temperature. So what I would advise you to do is to always put the same temperatures, kind of. So 50 degrees heating bath and 10 degrees chillers, it will work perfectly. So that's the only thing you need to kind of think about. Other than that, the vacuum will be set automatically. So how do you do that? You go into the little book, kind of, here, and you have what we call the Solvent Library. So in this Solvent Library, as you can see, you will have plenty of different solvents. Most of them are chemistry solvents, but the interesting ones for you will be ethanol, obviously, or it will be water down there. So I have water here. So as I told you, in my flask right now, I have tea, so it's water, right? So I choose water. I go OK, and as you can see here, now the set vacuum is to 46 millibars, and this was made automatically. So again, you don't really have to think about it. You just go in the Solvent Library and you press your solvent. So now we're going to start the distillation. So as you can see, it starts rotating. I will immerse my flask now. When you immerse your flask, please make sure that this part is not underwater. Now I will ask you to come a bit closer. I don't know if you've seen it before, but I have in my flask what we call the foam sensor. As you can see, it's here. It comes all the way from here and it goes down onto the flask. So what's the point of the foam sensor? Okay, we'll see first. There you go. That's the point of the foam sensor. So you have foam starting, and then automatically the system will see the foam and it will break the vacuum. It will aerate a bit the system automatically again, so that again the foam breaks. So what's the point of that? Obviously, if you have foam starting here, the foam will just start going here and here and onto the condenser, which means that your sample will be spread all over the glassware of the rotary evaporator. If that happens, you will have to clean the entire system. So that's a bit of a hard task, let's say, to do. But if you have this foam sensor, it will automatically break the foam, so you won't have to think about it or to think about cleaning the condenser that often. It will do it automatically. So that's a really cool tool. And to tell you a bit something about your applications as well, most of the time natural products tend to foam. And since you're going to use natural products in your application, this tool might be really useful for you. So as you can see, now I can just leave my rotary evaporator and it will do everything by itself. And so in the end, what I will have is that the water will be evaporated. I will get water here. So I will get clear water with the taste of mint tea. So that's the kind of applications that you can have. Then to stop everything, I just press stop and it goes automatically. So now that you have seen how the rotary evaporator works and all the accessories that might be useful for you in your application, I will give the control to Simone so that you can start as well with your presentation, Simone.
Here we go. Welcome back. It's me again, Simone. Hope everyone actually can see my screen. And as always, I like to start with some special greetings. I like to say thanks to obviously Büchi Labor Technique and also the Jerry Thomas people, which support was precious for the whole organization of this event. Now let's get to the point. One second, let's get to the point. Sorry. This webinar is being organized because we like to demonstrate some potential application in the bar industry of vacuum distillation by Büchi rotary evaporator. The first project or application I'm very glad to present is called the Old-Fashioned Clarified. We started to work on this recipe in 2018, and it's a perfect example of what we believe at the Jerry Thomas project a cocktail should be all about. Cocktails sometimes occupy an emotional space, being only the multisensorial expression of a specific recipe. Take as an example a classic Negroni, which is one of the most iconic drinks you have on the planet. But if you don't know the story behind it, it's just a very bittersweet liquid without any romance that could transform that liquid into a real experience. At the Jerry Thomas, drinks escape from this old approach, entering a new dimension where each cocktail is able to tell a story, carrying actually emotions with it, defined by specific concept, whose inspiration comes from both personal experiences and, of course, from in-depth scientific studies. Expressing new flavor experiences is what pushes chefs and bartenders to overcome the limits of the everyday ordinary job. And it's precisely from the study of flavor that we find inspiration to create our old-fashioned clarified. In particular, we place our attention on the impact that the visual stimulus of some cocktails components, such as the color perhaps, can influence the entire sensory experience that derives from it. In our case, distillation is the perfect technology to make a specific flavor invisible. In terms of application, as we will explain in a video shortly, we have used the rotovapor to modify two of the key ingredients of a classic old-fashioned bourbon and Angostura. Regarding the bourbon, there are an important consideration to make before we start, and the recipe data are calibrated according to the product that was chosen for this project. Obviously, if you guys choosing a different bourbon with a different ADP, means that you have to change the rotovapor settings if you like to replicate this recipe in your bar. Now, as you can see, by from the rotovapor settings, they represent actually a perfect compromise between the speed of execution and the final aromatic charge of the distillate. In fact, 80 millibar is an initial pressure quite low considering the 50 degrees Celsius of the thermal bath to evaporate a water ethanol solution. Actually, if I'm not mistaken, if you're gonna check it on the Büchi list of solvent, on that temperature, the initial pressure should be about 120 millibars or something like this. Anyway, normally this produce a little loss of product, which is actually due to the dispersion of the vapors which are sucked by the vacuum pump, and it's about 1 to 2%. The process itself is very simple. As you can see, we pour actually 110 grams of bourbon whiskey into the evaporation flask, and after that, actually, we evaporating the solution starting at 80 millibar, lowering the pressure slowly until we arrive to achieve a alcoholic strength of 72 millibar. Actually, 72% ABV is our tail cut, which help us to eliminate all those heavy polymers such as cellulose and lignin that are actually as well a fraction of the aging process of the distillate, which obviously we are not able to carry with the evaporation process. After your distillation is completed, you stabilize the solution with demineralized water, which is actually something I suggest you if you like to elevate the flavor of your distillate. But you can also use mineral water if you like to actually add minerality, so to increase the complexity of it. Until your ethanol content actually reach the 45%. After you did that, you can store your liquid in a airtight container for 24 hours, just to make sure it's gonna stabilize before you going to use it. Obviously, the bar, we don't need to forget as a bartenders or chefs that bar or restaurants are first of all business, and the applied technology also help us to get the maximum profit from our ingredients. That's why the leftover I was talking about, we actually obtaining the evaporation flask is not discarded. Once the liquid has been clarified by centrifugation, we made a no-alcoholic bourbon syrup by just adding some sugar, which carries with it some interesting body notes that we use to communicate a new range of non-alcoholic cocktails. So this is something for me very, very nice to know for you, that obviously when you're using such a technology like proto-vapor, you can use the concentrated solution you obtain, which in this case is obviously our bourbon distillate, but rather than discarding what you have left in the evaporation flask, you can still use it to make interesting drinks or food application actually. When we talk about a product like whiskey and we want to optimize its aromatic profile, I believe that esters cannot be overlooked, and this is the first group of aromatic compounds we taking in consideration today. Obviously, esters are probably, as you know already, formed during alcoholic fermentation by yeast metabolism and quantitatively present the major class of flavor compounds in distillates. And as you can see from the slide, you have some actually example of the few of the most important ones actually. In nature, there are actually hundreds of ester isolated, and all of them have actually a different aromatic charge. And esters are important because esters and ethanol during the aging time through complex chemical reactions bind to some aromatic compounds that are actually extracted from the barrel. And it's for this reason that we have selected a whiskey that has spent enough time in it to stabilize its aromatic profile. Distilling a bourbon that is too young, especially under 9 years old, does not produce any satisfactory results. So another advice for you if you like to replicate this recipe in your bar is that obviously you're choosing a bourbon that has spent, as I said, enough time in the barrel in order to achieve a very flavorful distillate. To achieve obviously a completely clear liquid, we have to distill even the Angostura bitter. As you know, guys, Angostura is one of the best known and most appreciated aromatic bitters worldwide. Regarding the rotovapor settings and the evaporation process, this application is similar to the previous one, but with obviously some differences. And they all depend by obviously the composition of the product, and in this case even from its viscosity. In fact, some aromatic compounds of the Angostura are highly soluble in alcohol and partially in water, which is the reason why they emerge during the whole distillation process. For this reason, I actually suggest you to completely evaporate the solution in order to obtain a distillate with a very powerful aromatic profile. Obviously, sweetness and bitterness, two fundamental gustatory properties of a bitter, are lost during the evaporation process. Reason for, once the distillation process is over, we reintroduce sugar and gentian, which actually is the most important bittering compound of the Angostura bitter. And once we did that, obviously using some, you can use Brixometer if you have one, or if you have the chance to access to digital hydrometer, they're actually extremely precise instrument that you can use to add actually sucrose and water until actually you almost replicate the original rates of sugar content of the Angostura, and obviously its ethanol concentration that you can see by label is actually 44.7%. Doing that, we actually able to replicate almost the taste of the original product, obviously getting rid of the color. If you're wondering how we actually reintroduce the bittering flavor, as you see from the slide, after the sugar is added and the ethanol is fixed, or ethanol concentration is fixed, we actually cook the solution sous vide at 55 degrees for 20 minutes with very good quality gentian root. Obviously, we calculate the amount of gentian based on our palate, so we wanted to recreate a lovely bittering flavor just using 1 up to 2% of gentian root. The cooking process with gentian gives the distillate a pale yellow color, which is obviously absolutely not visible to the human eye when the old-fashioned clarified is served to our guests. As well, when the distillation process is done, you can store your clarified angostura in a airtight container or just straight in the bitter bottle. Here we go. So the second project we like to present you is Secret Fire, a variation of a classic Old Cuban cocktail. The Old Cuban is a drink that represents a fusion between a French 75 and a mojito, in which obviously sense of smell actually plays a primary role. Sense of smell, especially in liquids, represents 70 up to 80% of the whole flavor of what we actually bring in our mouth. In the Old Cuban, the bubbles from champagne carries, as you will see in the later video, the aroma of mint up to the surface of the glass, making this drink one of the most appreciated cocktails for its olfactory notes. Obviously, sense of smell has a great connection with the world of perfumery, whose spiritual heritage can be linked with the world of cocktails as well. One of the most ancestral perfume ingredients, which has always been used by South American populations, you might know it already, is Palo Santo wood. Thanks to a controlled distillation process, we are able to transport its mystical flavor in a cocktail. As you may have noticed, to obtain the maximum aromatic expression from our ingredients, if you read the first point of the slide, it's necessary to proceed with a solid liquid vacuum extraction for at least 7 days. If you don't have access to this technology, you can replicate a similar result with a simple 12 days maceration process in a jar or a airtight container, or the container you have on disposition in your lab. Regarding the roto vapor settings, in this case, as you can see, thermal body is on 40 degrees Celsius. And we choose this temperature because obviously all depends from the type of material treated. Since Palo Santo is rich in essential oil, we proceed with the distillation, which is below 50 degrees Celsius, in order to avoid any kind of deterioration process, like the hydrolysis perhaps, which can actually occur in the final part of the distillation, where in the evaporating flask you have a very low ethanol concentration. The whole distillation run takes about an hour, and it's enough to obtain a distillate enriched with the essential oils from this beautiful plant, and actually which is still widely used in the perfume industry, as well, as I explained before. As we see for the previous applications, after the distillation is done, you can stabilize the solution with some demineralized water and store the obtained liquid in a hard-tight container for 24 hours before use, in order to stabilize this flavor profile. And obviously, the main component of what we try to extract from Palo Santo through the distillation is the aroma of its essential oil, and the main component of Palo Santo essential oil are actually terpenes, a class of organic compounds which are mainly present in some resins, woods, leaves of many botanicals. In particular, as you see from the slide, Palo Santo is actually, he has a high percentage of limonene, which you might know, guys, I will explain it in the video anyway, is the main component of lemon essential oil, and is also the compound that gives lemon its distinctive smell. And whose concentration actually in the essential oil of Palo Santo can vary depending on the area where the tree grows and the wood is actually collected. But we can also find traces of other aromatic compounds such as menthol and mannitol, which is the reason why we can actually use it successfully to substitute the mint inside of this old Cuban interpretation. Last but not least, I like to share with you even our Bloody Mary icon, which actually is a project we developed recently, actually a few months ago. And obviously, as you know, tomato is the main ingredients of Bloody Mary. And obviously, because of that, this drink, it has a very strong and umami flavor. And umami is not only one of the 5 tastes, is also capable for us to communicate the culinary tradition of many countries, such as the Italian one. If you think about it, actually we find it in the combination of tomato and Parmesan sauce that we are actually that we like to use for our pasta every day. And I will explain something more about umami in the video that we'll show you soon. Obviously, being our Bloody Mary and Mexican-inspired cocktail, we wanted to use an ingredient that best expresses the Mexican gastronomic tradition, and I'm talking about the mole sauce. As happened with the angostura, key ingredients of this sauce are actually sweet spices, whose aromatic compounds emerge in all phases of the distillation process. Obviously, you might know already, but the recipe from mole sauce can vary from region to region, and obviously, you know, as far as I see, sweet spices are used in almost all of them. It is therefore necessary to completely evaporate the solution to obtain a distillate with a satisfactory flavor profile. As always, the process is very simple to follow, but can vary according to the solvent you are using. So in this case, obviously, we're using ethanol, but if you're using water, just keep in mind that you have to adjust the settings based on this, but it can also change based on the molecules you are using. Obviously, we pour this ratio in the evaporating flask. If you're using very heavy and let's say sticky, oily stuff like molecules, I suggest you to use the Beaker Flask, which is gonna make your life much easier and in terms of cleanings and smoothness in the process as well. Obviously, these 10 grams of molecules and 100 grams of neutral grain spirit represent just the ratio you need to use for this recipe. Obviously, feel free to put more in your evaporation flask. And again, here the distillation run takes about an hour, and after distillation is complete and your the solution has completely evaporated, you can actually stabilize the solution with demineralized water and store it in a airtight container. Don't discard the mole after the distillation is done. You can actually dry it and powder it and use it for a food application as well. Obviously, through the olfactory notes from the mole, we are exponentially enhancing the umami taste of the Bloody Mary. Sweet spices such as cinnamon are fundamental ingredients of the sauce, as I said before, and is the reason and for this reason it's important to consider for me some interesting aromatic components, particularly actually soluble in ethanol. Which are always present when we're distilling actually sweet spices. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm done with my presentation. I will now show you the video I was talking about the whole time, and actually where myself and my colleague Michele Garofalo will demonstrate how to translate these applications into cocktails. Before leaving, I invite you to contact us for any clarifications or insight on the topics we just covered. Please feel free to contact us to the following email addresses. And now, please enjoy the video.
Hello everyone and welcome to the Jerry Thomas educational program. My name is Onorati Simone and I'm the head of research and development of the Jerry Thomas project. Just before we start, please let me introduce my dear colleague Michele.
Hi everyone, I'm Michele Garofalo. I'm a part of Jerry Thomas project and I'm also responsible for the training program for bartenders called Jerry Thomas Educational. So the Jerry Thomas is a project born 10 years ago and it is a sort of recognition to the master J.P. Thomas, considered the father of the world mixology. The goal was to enhance classical mixology in a period when mixed drink in Italy was a bit far away from the concept of balance and therefore drinking well and responsibly. Our mixology consists in a good blend between a pre-prohibition cocktail with a nice Italian touch. We are also really glad to have been awarded alongside with the best 50 bars in the world since 2014. Today we will analyze the historical and traditional part of some iconic cocktail and how knowledge on modern technologies allow us to revisit this recipe by creating a curious twist on classic.
We invited you in our Bar Academy because we would like to show you how to apply sustainable technological development to classic cocktails. As Michele said, we will present you 3 very iconic classic drinks, also presenting you 3 modern variations of these recipes. In fact, today's webinar aims to show you how to exploit the potential of raw to vapor and of course vacuum distillation, in order to explore a new range of sensorial experiences and how we as bartenders can take an advantage of this technology in order to communicate a specific concept and giving to our ideas a liquid form. But let me just explain what I mean when I just said ideas, concept and liquid forms. Distillation perhaps is a very ancient technology that mankind has exploited for hundreds of years. Raw to vapor is a device that allowed us to evaporate or distill different mixtures at temperatures much lower than those normally reached by classic column stills, for example. In our specific case, think about all the spirits you are using in your bar every day and you will have a better idea of the importance that this technology also plays in our social life. Even if today the rotary evaporator is widely used in the best bars and restaurants all around the world, its potential still remains to be fully explored. We at the Jerry Thomas believe that cocktail recipes shouldn't just communicate or express a sensory experience, but it must also be able to communicate a story. And technology is the perfect vehicle for this purpose. The first recipe we'd like to share with you today is the Old-Fashioned Clarified, a modern variation of a great classic, the Old-Fashioned. But just before we get into it, Michele is gonna tell us the story behind the classic Old-Fashioned and how to prepare a very good one.
The first official document that talks about Old-Fashioned dates back 1880, when from the columns of the Chicago Tribune, the Democrat Samuel Tilden invited his party companions to toast to the renunciation of running for president of the United States, drinking with some cocktails, like Old-Fashioned. A few years later, the same newspaper interviewed a local bartender, asking him what the trendy cocktail of the period were. The bartender also mentioned the Old-Fashioned among several cocktails prepared with sugar lump and rye whiskey instead of bourbon. Moreover, in the book La Cuisine Creole, published in 1885, it is mentioned with the name spoon cocktail precisely because it was prepared and served with a teaspoon, so that the customer could bring the desired degree of dilution to his liking. At the Jerry Thomas Speakeasy we prepared with sugar lump of vanilla, completely soaked with Angostura bitter, then we dissolve the sugar while using a splash of water and a muddler, and then we add 75 ml of bourbon whiskey, added in 3 times by adding ice simultaneously. I start with the first 25 ml of bourbon and I give a nice stir, more ice, And I carry on with another 25 ml of bourbon. And the last 25 last still. And then I garnish it with a lemon zest. There we go. And here you have it, Old-Fashioned.
As you can see, this drink, with its 4 ingredients, is among the most appreciated and of course requested cocktails all over the world. Wondering how we could restructure the recipe of a classic old-fashioned with a modern approach, we decided to start studying the basic principle of the flavor and of course its composition. Today the flavor is known to be a multisensory experience. To understand if what we eat or drink is to our liking, the brain collects and processes a big range of different stimuli, such as auditory, gustatory, visual, and tactile ones. One of the most underrated sensory stimuli when it comes to flavor is actually sight. Some studies carried out by various American universities have shown how, in some circumstances, the visual stimuli can affect the perception of flavor and sometimes the acceptance of food itself. It is therefore very important to always provide unique experiences that are able to stimulate all the human senses. Consequently, a classic old-fashioned deprived of any pigment, it represents a very slippery interpretation for our brain. In fact, the stimulus given by a crystal clear liquid is much more associated with a very refreshing drink, such a glass of water perhaps, rather than a full body style of drink that carries as well the aromatic notes from the wood. After we serve it to our guests, the shock of perceiving a very well-known invisible flavor is the wow effect that makes this experience absolutely unique. To achieve our goal, we use the rotary evaporator, distilling 2 of the main ingredients of a classic old-fashioned, whiskey and angostura. In this way, we're getting rid of all the pigments as they are very heavy compounds unable to pass in the airborne state. And as well, we're concentrating most of the aromatic compounds, which gives the whiskey and the angostura their classic aromatic threads. Regarding the final execution at the bar, we keep it like the classic one. So the drink is gonna be stirred over ice, and we will start with 60 ml of our clarified bourbon right inside our mixing tin. We then add our clarified angostura bitter, 11 dashes, and finally we put our sweetener, which in this case is sugar syrup, 10 ml. We're adding some ice inside, and we're gonna give him a nice stir in order to chill, combine, and give the right amount of dilution. After the drink is done, we serve it over a single chunk of ice, just to keep the dilution, just in order to control the right amount of dilution. And as happened for the classic recipe, we're gonna garnish it with a lemon twist. And there we go, clarified old-fashioned.
Another cocktail that we like to present today is the Bloody Mary. There were several personalities who would have liked to be credited for its paternity. These include Fernand Petiot, who claimed to have invented it in 1921, and Bertin Asimont, credited for his invention by Colin Peterfield, which is the writer of the book Cocktail of the Ritz, Paris. The cocktail was often drunk by Ernest Hemingway and used as a camouflage to be able to drink without being discovered by the petulant wife. According to this theory, the cocktail was called Bloody Mary just after the above expression by the artist. Good Bertin, Bloody Mary didn't notice anything. classic interpretation provides 6 ml of regular vodka, 90 ml of tomato mix, which includes fresh pressed tomato juice, black pepper, celery salt and Tabasco, and 15 ml of fresh lemon juice. Then we mix it well using the throwing technique. Just few pourings. That's it. And we serve it in a high tumbler glass. And then we garnish it with lemon zest. And here we have it, classic Bloody Mary. Please enjoy it.
Umami was discovered for the first time by Dr. Ikeda at the Imperial University of Tokyo in the 19th century. The molecule responsible for the umami taste, which we can describe with the word tasty, it's called monosodium glutamate, or MSG. The MSG is present in many foods such as tomatoes, anchovies, mushrooms, milk, and many vegetables. This modern interpretation blends the concept of highball drinks, where the main ingredient is carbonation or CO2, with the classic Bloody Mary. For this reason, we clarified our tomato mix with the centrifuge. Tomato mix, which is made of freshly pressed Samarzano juice, a very traditional tomato variety from Italy, Worcester sauce, Tabasco, black peppercorn tincture, salt, and a little bit of barley miso. We also use tequila for this recipe, which is the reason why we decided to borrow the mole sauce from the Mexican gastronomic culture, an element that decidedly helped us to enhance the umami flavor of the drink. The mole sauce is a typical Mexican product whose recipes varies according to the gastronomic tradition of the region in which it is produced. The sauce we use is made of various ingredients including almonds, cocoa, chicken and tomatoes. Distilling the sauce with the natural grain spirits, always using the root to vapor, we are able to obtain a liquid which is full of aromatic substances, obtaining a correspondence in between the savory flavor of the recipe and its retro-olfactory notes. We're gonna now execute the drink. Let's start from the glass. As a highball style of Bloody Mary, we will need a highball glass with a single chunk of ice inside. We're then gonna pour 40 ml of tequila, as we already mentioned in the presentation before. There you go, right into the glass. We're then gonna add our mole distillate in order to, as I said, enhance the umami flavor of the drink. Just 10 ml straight in the glass as well. We're then going to fill the glass with our clarified and carbonated tomato mix. Just giving a very gentle stir just to make sure we combine all the ingredients together. Obviously all those bubbles helps to carry on top of the glass all the different layers of aromas that we find in this drink. And here you have it, our clarified Bloody Mary. Please enjoy.
Last but not least is the Old Cuban. Old Cuban is a modern classic cocktail born in the early 20s in New York, created by Audrey Saunders at the Pegu Club. We can say that we are in front of a fancy champagne cocktail born from a wedding between a mojito and a French 75. His success has been incredible. We prepare it using 45 ml of Cuban rum, then we add 22.5 ml of fresh lime juice, Then we add 30 ml of simple syrup, 50 bricks, few dashes of Angostura bitter, and 6 mint leaves. We add some ice and we shake it well. We double strain it in a copper glass. And then we top it up with some champagne. And also we can garnish it with a small mint leaf. Ladies and gentlemen, this one is the classic whole Cuban. Please enjoy.
Sacred Fire, a modern twist of a classical Cuban, is the last drink I will present you today, and is a cocktail inspired by the world of perfume and by an in-depth study made on the sense of smell. When it comes to smell, we can easily introduce the differences between the orthonasal smell and the retronasal smell. Orthonasal smell is the one we commonly think of, and it mediates a big range of stimuli, evoking our sensation of the aromas of food, and in our case, the sense of perfumes. Retronasal smell can be considered a different type of smell. As just mentioned, it arises from inside of the mouth, and is always accompanied by the stimulation of other senses like taste and touch. Retronasal smell intercepts all the aromatic molecules of the food that are released while chewing, creating a false image of the flavor which seems to appear inside our mouth, while in reality everything we perceive in our mouth for a good 70 to 80% is actually smell. Sacred Fire is therefore an edible perfume, where the ingredients used are little associated with gastronomy applications, but heavily used in the perfume industry. We anyway kept the DNA of a classical Cuban intact, with rum, champagne and sugar. We replaced the lemon juice with the citric acid solution, not only to enhance the acidity of champagne, but even to contain the loss of CO2 due to the solid particles present in the lemon juice. We also replaced the mint with a distillate based on Palo Santo, a sacred wood used in some esoteric cultures of South America. Its fumes connect the spirit to the god, purifying the houses from the evil entities. Distilling is essential oil using a rotavap. We are able to extract different aromatic compounds such as menthol, anethol and limonene, the same aromatic compound that gives lemon its distinctive smell. We also add a sandalwood bitter, simply infusing sous vide Angostura bitter with food-grade sandalwood essential oil. Sandalwood also goes very well with Palo Santo, adding to the drink beautiful notes of almond and incense. While the classical Cuban is a shaken drink, Sacred Fire is actually stirred. So we will start actually pouring blends of rum. So we're gonna pour 7.5 ml right into the mixing tin. We will then add a little bit of Fino Sherry, which is gonna obviously help to open up all the almonds flavor coming from the Palo Santo wood and the sandalwood bitter as well. So then, as we mentioned before, there is no lemon juice inside of the drink, so we're gonna use just a touch of a concentrated citric acid solution, just 2.5 ml. Right inside, we will use sugar to balance the acidity coming from champagne and the citric acid solution. In this case, we're using 10 ml. We then adding the main protagonist of the drink, which in this case, as I was explaining before, is a Palo Santo distillate. So we're gonna add just 12.5 milliliters right inside. There you go. And finally, last but not least, we're gonna pour 4 dashes of our sandalwood bitter. We're gonna stir it up. We're just gonna give it a quick stir. We don't want to ruin the flavor with too much dilution, just in order to chill it and combine all the ingredients together. It's a very elegant style of drink, so we're gonna serve it in a beautiful champagne flute. We're gonna pour just a touch of champagne inside. This helps to, as you're pouring the liquid on top of the champagne, helps to decrease the loss of CO2 and also mix already the two liquids together. Right after that, we're gonna just add another splash of champagne. And obviously, as before with the Bloody Mary, all the bubbles carrying on top of the drinks all the different layers of aromatic compounds, creating this edible perfume effect. And there you have it, Sacred Fire. We are done for today from the Jerry Thomas educational program. Myself and Michele, we would like to thank you for being here, listening. We hope you enjoyed everything, and we also like to thank Tanina and Andriana from Büchi Labortechnik for their support and for the organization of this webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Here we are, guys. I hope you enjoy the video. I'm now gonna switch back to Anina, and we will have some time for the Q&A session.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Simone, for all the knowledge that you shared with us. It was all very interesting. I think we can also start sharing our camera so that everyone can see us during the Q&A session. I will share my screen as well. So when some of you registered, you submitted some questions, and we would like to thank you very much for all the questions that you submitted. We took a few ones because obviously we could not respond to all of them, but please don't hesitate to write your questions as well in the chat right now. We will try to respond to as many questions as we can. Otherwise, we will get back to you via email in order to respond to them. So Simone, the first question that we had for you is, do you use trial and error to determine the conditions? And the second one would be, are there any precautions to take when using an evaporator for food?
Actually, of course, before I go straight to the answer, I'd like to say that obviously, because of the very small amount of time we have during these sessions, this was like an introduction to obviously bigger world. So I encourage you guys to send us an email if you have any doubts of what we just covered, you know, and we will try to give you obviously a bigger answer actually. Let's actually go to the point. Obviously, we having different, we established different collaborations with other actually companies in Italy. Obviously, I'm talking about distilleries, liquor companies, and obviously before we start any project, we obviously you know, double checking on what we do. So the composition of the materials we're using, if there is any poisoning agents, and so on. There are obviously some you know, equations you can use as well to calculate the extraction coefficients you actually apply to any solution. So this obviously gives you the an idea of for example, how much grams of palosan do you need to use in order to achieve a specific flavor. But I also believe that, you know, one of the most advanced instruments nature actually already gave us is smell and taste. So, you know, you can use science and technology, but I believe that obviously what you achieve by smell and taste is very important. Because if people don't like what you do, then, you know, the whole dreams is destroyed. But yes, we actually use different equations. We use the endorsement of our master distiller from Turin, you know, because obviously, if you don't know, Jerry Thomas is even producing gins and vermouth. And yes, so there are different ways you can actually calibrate your recipes, and this is one of them. When it comes to food application, I always, as I explained before, is important to know the composition of what you are using. Obviously, when it comes to botanicals, there are few of them that they can be potentially poisoning. One of them, for example, is absinthe, which is well known to be difficult to distill because it's releasing some very poisoning compounds. So my advice is know your botanicals first, and you know, if you don't have big knowledge on that, you can obviously ask experts in the field, which they're always obviously happy to share knowledge and you know, drive you doing taking the right decisions.
Okay, thank you, Simone. I would maybe add something from my part as well, is that if you guys buy a secondhand rotavapor, make sure that it was not used in the chemistry industry, because we didn't really talk about that, but the rotavapor is actually used usually in the chemistry industry. And so if chemicals went in the glassware, it might be dangerous to eat what you make in this rotavapor. So if so, please make sure no chemicals went in there. So I can go on with the other question, Simone. Is any special requirement, like studies, to get and use one of those in a bar?
Well, of course, actually, when it comes to technology and especially distillation, it will be, I believe, necessary to know the physical and chemical principle behind this process in order to obviously obtain always the maximum expression of each ingredient treated. But I also like to say that obviously it's not required a you know, university, chemical university, and stuff like this. So you can still obviously improve yourself. You know, as I said before, you know, asking experts in the field to drive you during your learning process. And you know, especially even you know, with applications, obviously you always getting the best out of it. But I believe, yes, it's actually necessary to know the basic physical and chemical principle behind distillation.
Let's move on to the next question. Is there any loss of the liquid with this method, and does the ABV suffer changes?
Yes, as I explained when I was showing the slides from the Old-Fashioned Clarified, the bourbon distillate, obviously what it can happen is that if you push the pressure a little bit too much, some of the vapors, they can actually be sucked by the vacuum pump, and this means that you're actually losing some, or not just some of the flavored compounds, but you're losing some volume as well, some liquid, you know. But this is obviously, as you know, in life everything is like a compromise, you know. So what I was explaining is that we fix the settings based on the speed of execution, and the aromatic profile the aromatic profile that we achieve on the end. So the loss is always very little, so we're talking about 1%, maximum 2%, which is usually less than 50 ml. ABV does not very much suffer this kind of loss because we're talking about a very little amount of liquid. But yes, what it could happen is that if you push too much let's say the pressure, you can actually lose some of the vapor, but it's a very little amount of liquid.
Yeah, I will also add a little thing here. If you are kind of scared to push too hard or anything, or you don't really know where to start, then using the solvent library, as I showed at the very beginning of the video, might be very helpful, because those settings are calculated settings, and if you use them, then nothing will go through the pump, so you won't have any losses there. So Simone, another question for you. How do you make the tails and head cuts?
So basically, this will be another answer, another question where we will be here talking about for an hour. I'll try to do it as simple as possible. So basically, as you see in the slides we were talking about before, we never actually distill starting from a fermented mash. So taking the example of the bourbon distillate, obviously we decided for the cut when we believed that the concentration of all the aromatic compounds was actually enough to obtain a flavorful distillate. Obviously, this can be done in different ways. If you still today going around distilleries and you have the chance to talk with master distillers, most of them, they still do it by smell and taste. That, as I was explaining before, it's very important tool. But you have different methods as well to actually understand how you're concentrating the different components in your distillate using different technologies like gas chromatography perhaps. But I understand it is a fairly expensive technology. So another actually way you can do that is by calculating the ethanol concentration. So this means that you actually have to fraction your distillation process, sampling few mLs each time. And this is actually, and obviously using hydrometers or any actually instrument you have in your lab, you can obviously understand your ethanol composition and as well the concentration of the different aromatic compounds. And this is actually helped you to actually make the decision where to cut and how. When we actually work with fermented mash, the story is completely different because it's getting a little bit more complicated. Obviously, you know that yeast metabolism is producing not just ethanol, but different high alcohols, like methanol perhaps, which they having different boiling points, you know. In particular, methanol has a very has a lower boiling points compared to ethanol, but it doesn't mean that it just evaporate or emerge during the first let's say run of distillation, and is because it's highly soluble in water as well, and based on the concentration of ethanol in water, it can actually follow water boiling point as well, which means that you have it in all the phases of the distillation process. Another thing you need to consider is the damage that your fermented mash can have. And when I say damage, I talk about the potential presence of some acetic acid. That can be actually something you need to consider because it's a volatile organic acid that you may actually transport in your distillate. So there are different actually things to consider when it comes to fermented mash. And there is not, I believe, this is my personal opinion, so I'm not saying there is like actually science, but I believe that cannot be a standard of this is how you cut when it comes to fermented mash. And still people actually do it mostly by smell and taste, or actually as well as I was saying before, evaluating the ethanol concentration is a good method to decide where and how to make your cut.
Great, thank you, Simone, for your answer. I think we are out of time now. Thank you very much for attending this webinar. Thank you, Simone, for helping us to make this webinar happen.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. You can see all our Büchi platforms on the left side of the slide, and the Jerry Thomas platforms as well on the right side of the slide. Again, we will try, just send an email or write in the chat, and we will try to respond to your questions by email. So we would like to thank you for joining. Have a nice day and take care. Bye.
Thank you very much, guys. Bye-bye.